My name is Evelyn Carter, and I turned 66 the night my son gifted his mother-in-law a $50,000 diamond ring while I sat at the same table with empty hands and a forced smile. The restaurant lights were golden, the cameras flashing, the kind of place where every laugh sounded rehearsed and every toast had a purpose. Daniel lifted the velvet box like a magician revealing treasure, slid the ring onto Lorraine's finger, and the whole table gasped. She covered her mouth with polished nails, pretending to cry, and everyone clapped. When it was my turn, Daniel only leaned over, kissed my cheek, and said, "Mom, you always taught me generosity isn't about things, it's about spirit." My spirit felt small in that moment. I said nothing. I had worked 40 years as a seamstress, stitching luxury dresses I could never afford. Every bead, every thread had carried my prayers for him to live better than I did. I thought I had succeeded. That night, I realized success had a price, and it was my dignity. Lorraine lifted her glass and winked at me across the table. "You raised a true gentleman, Evelyn," she said. Her smile was sharp, the kind that draws blood without leaving a mark. "He knows how to treat women." I nodded, swallowing the bitterness that rose like fire. I watched her admire the diamond under the light, while the ring I had worn for 40 years, a cheap silver band from a man who left when Daniel was 9, felt heavier than it ever had. When the waiter came with dessert, Daniel pushed a tiny box toward me. I opened it. Inside was a keychain. "A silver letter D, D for Daniel," he said. "So you always carry me with you." I smiled. Everyone laughed softly, thinking it was sentimental. But my hands were shaking. I excused myself, went to the restroom, and stared at the mirror. I saw a woman no one saw anymore, wrinkles like folded fabric, eyes that once believed gratitude was a promise. I looked at my reflection and whispered, "Some investments don't shine until the lights go out." By midnight, I was home. The house smelled faintly of lavender detergent and old books. I took off my shoes, sat by the window, and watched the city lights flicker like dying stars. My phone buzzed with a photo Daniel had tagged me in, him smiling, Lorraine flaunting the ring, Brooke hugging him like she had just married a saint. The caption said, "Family. The greatest gift of all." My stomach twisted. Family. The word had meant everything to me once. Now it felt like a costume people wore for photos. I closed my phone and walked to my sewing room. In the corner, under a stack of old fabrics, was a small blue folder with documents I hadn't touched in years, papers I had promised myself I'd never need. Deeds, certificates, contracts, all neatly arranged by a lawyer named Mr. Hale. The title page read, "Carter Logistics Trust." The words glowed like embers. I had co-founded that logistics yard when Daniel was in college, signing contracts in a dusty office no one believed would last. Back then, I put in my savings, $20,000, and became a silent partner. Everyone said I was foolish. But I understood fabric, and I understood people, both could stretch farther than they appeared. Now, decades later, the land that company sat on was being rezoned for airport expansion. My 50% share, according to Hale's last update, was valued at $28 million. $28 million. I had never said a word about it. Not to Daniel. Not to anyone. People think silence means weakness. They forget silence also means observation. I had watched Daniel grow from a boy who cried when his shoes tore to a man who sneered at the word humble. Brooke taught him vanity, Lorraine taught him entitlement. I taught him sacrifice. And now, all three lessons were clashing in front of me. The next morning, I brewed coffee and called Mr. Hale. His voice, calm as ever, answered, "Mrs. Carter, I was about to call you. The rezoning passed. The buyers wired the funds. The escrow closes Friday." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Keep everything as planned. Same accounts. Same confidentiality." He hesitated. "Are you sure you don't want your son involved in the trust documents?" I smiled faintly. "No. My son has already received his inheritance." When I hung up, I sat in silence. The house ticked with the sound of the old clock Daniel had gifted me when he got his first job. He said, "So you always know I'm on time, Mom." He was 21 then, full of promise. Somewhere between that boy and the man who gave another woman a $50,000 ring, time had turned kindness into currency. I looked at the clock again. It was time to make a withdrawal. I opened the blue folder and wrote a note in the margin of the final page. If they ask where I went, tell them I finally took my own advice: never work for people who pay you in words. Then, I pulled out another envelope, a smaller one I had sealed long ago. Inside were photos of Daniel as a boy, his school drawings, and the first check he ever wrote me for Mother's Day, $5 and a heart instead of a signature. I slipped the envelope into my bag. That was the only memory I wanted to keep. By evening, I drove to the coast. My car's radio hummed softly, old songs from a time when love meant something. I parked near a motel, checked in under a false name, and watched the sun melt into the water. My reflection on the window looked calmer than it had in years. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel poor. I didn't feel invisible. I felt balanced. The world had taken everything it wanted from me. Now, I was taking back what was mine. Before sleeping, I sent 3 emails, one to Mr. Hale, one to my neighbor Mrs. Alvarez, and one to Daniel. To Hale, activate Phase 2. Confidentiality remains absolute. To Alvarez, if they come looking, tell them I'm safe. Don't tell them where. To Daniel, I hope the ring brings you luck. I have my own sparkle to chase now. Then, I powered off my phone and placed it on the bedside table. Tomorrow, I would disappear completely. And no one would know that the woman they pitted at dinner had quietly left with $28 million and a plan that would teach her son the value of absence. The morning I decided to disappear began with silence. No alarm, no calls, no footsteps in the hallway, just the faint hum of the world outside my window. I sat with a cup of black coffee, tracing circles on the rim with my finger, thinking about how easy it was for life to go from noise to nothing. When I was younger, silence used to scare me. It meant absence, loneliness, the kind of quiet that eats at your bones. But now, silence felt like armor. After decades of holding my breath to keep peace in a house where my kindness was currency, silence finally meant control. I opened the blue folder again and looked at the deed that confirmed the transfer of ownership. Carter Logistics, my name still printed there in bold letters. I had signed those documents nearly 40 years ago, sitting beside my then-partner, Henry Marks, in a small warehouse that smelled like rubber and dust. Everyone laughed when we started the company. 2 middle-aged dreamers trying to compete with corporations. But we worked in silence while the world doubted us, and silence, I learned, breeds results. By the time Daniel graduated college, that company had grown into something substantial. I could have told him back then. I almost did, on his graduation day. But when he took the microphone to thank everyone and forgot to mention me, I realized something: people only remember your sacrifices if they're visible. And I had spent my life being invisible. For years, I told myself I was saving the money for him, that someday he'd be ready to receive it with grace. But grace fades when entitlement grows. I saw it in his eyes every time Brooke smirked at my thrift store shoes or Lorraine looked at my chipped mug like it was a symptom of failure. They saw poverty. I saw choice. I had always chosen modesty to stay hidden, to keep the wolves guessing. I wasn't a poor woman, I was a quiet storm no one had noticed yet. The plan unfolded in my mind like a pattern on fabric, measured, deliberate, irreversible. Phase 2 meant 3 things: severance, substitution, and silence. Severance, cut ties cleanly. Substitution, create a narrative they could believe. Silence, let their imagination destroy them faster than truth ever could. First, I drove to the post office and opened a private P.O. box under the alias E. Carlton. I smiled at the clerk who handed me the small silver key. For deliveries only, I said. Confidential paperwork. Next, I stopped at the bank. My lawyer had already arranged the transfer, trusts divided into 3 parts, 1 charitable foundation, 1 private living fund, and 1 contingency reserve labeled Sunset account. The foundation's name was simple, the Carter Mothers Fund. Its purpose, support single mothers who worked hourly jobs, like I once did, to put their children through school. Hale had questioned my choice to donate the majority of my fortune instead of leaving it to family. I told him family is what you build, not what you beg to be part of. By noon, my house looked like a museum of someone who used to exist. Photos gone from frames, clothes folded neatly for donation, and only one suitcase on the bed, half filled with essentials and the rest with paper, documents, journals, and a printed copy of my will, newly updated. I left small traces of normalcy on purpose, dishes drying on the rack, a light left on in the hallway, and my slippers beside the couch. If Daniel came looking, I wanted him to think I had simply stepped out and never returned. Disappearance is not about running away. It's about precision. Before leaving, I walked into my sewing room one last time. The air smelled faintly of cotton and thread. On the desk sat the old Singer machine that had been my companion through hunger and heartbreak. I ran my hand along its metal frame, remembering the sound of its rhythm, the heartbeat that had carried me through decades of survival. I whispered, "Thank you," and closed the lid gently. At 3 p.m, Daniel called. I didn't answer. The voicemail came seconds later, cheerful and distracted. "Hey, Mom, Brooke and I are heading to Lakeview this weekend. Oh, and Lorraine wants to know if you could hem her dress for the gala. You're so good with those things. Love you." I replayed it twice, studying his tone. Love you. Casual. Thoughtless. Performed. I pressed delete and unplugged the landline. That night, I drove to a small town 3 hours away, where the air tasted like salt and pine. The motel clerk didn't ask questions. I paid in cash and signed the register with my alias. The room was small but clean, with faded wallpaper and a window facing the ocean. I unpacked slowly, each motion deliberate, as if I were unfolding my new identity piece by piece. In the mirror, I looked older but lighter. Every wrinkle had a purpose, every scar a lesson. I thought about Daniel and felt nothing. No hate, no love, just clarity. Love without respect is a wound that never heals. The next morning, I visited the lawyer's office in person. Mr. Hale, a composed man in his 70s, greeted me with a knowing nod. "You're sure about this, Evelyn?" he asked, sliding the final set of documents across the desk. "You're cutting them off completely." I smiled, signing each page with calm precision. "No, Mr. Hale. I'm not cutting them off. I'm setting them free, from expectations they never wanted and from guilt I no longer need." He nodded, stamping the papers. "You're quite the strategist," he said. "Your husband would be proud." I shook my head. No, he wouldn't. He didn't know strategy. He only knew running away. I learned what not to do from him. By noon, the Carter Mothers Fund officially existed. $20 million secured in a long-term endowment, with a board of women who had lived stories like mine. I asked that my name never appear publicly. Legacy means little when it becomes vanity. The remaining $8 million were divided, $5 million to the sunset account, $3 million to my private use. Hale gave me a card with a new bank code and an international wire option. "In case you ever want to disappear farther," he said. I pocketed it with a faint smile. If I do, it won't be out of fear. I spent the next few days blending in, shopping at local markets, reading newspapers, observing strangers who didn't know my name. The anonymity felt like oxygen. But part of me knew peace would not last. The storm would reach my doorstep soon, in the form of my son's voice shouting through a phone line, demanding explanations. That's why I had written letters in advance. One for Daniel, one for Brooke, and one for Lorraine. Each one carried a different truth. Daniel's letter was simple: "You once said I gave you nothing. Now, I'm giving you something priceless, an opportunity to learn the value of absence. Money may fill your pockets, but emptiness teaches you where worth begins." Brooke's letter was sharper: "You built your life around appearances. When the mirror cracks, remember who handed you the glass." And Lorraine's letter? I didn't even write words. I just sent her a printed receipt of the $50,000 ring, circled the date, and wrote beneath it, price checked. When I mailed them, I felt lighter. Each envelope was a thread cut cleanly from a fabric that had long strangled me. Mrs. Alvarez called that evening, her voice warm but cautious. "Evelyn, dear," Daniel came by. He looked worried. I smiled faintly. "Worried or guilty?" "Maybe both," she said. "He asked if you were okay." I paused. "Tell him I'm more than okay. Tell him I finally took my own advice." She sighed softly. "You know this will break his heart." "No," I said. "It will teach him where it is." For the first time in my life, I slept without expectation. No one to please. No one to wait for. No one to apologize to for existing. When I woke the next morning, the sunlight fell through the window like gold thread, stitching warmth into my soul. I brewed coffee, opened my journal, and wrote 5 words, "I am not coming back." Then I drew a line beneath them, a seam closed forever. Across town, at that very moment, Daniel must have been staring at an empty house, wondering where his mother had gone. Maybe he'd think it was an accident. Maybe he'd assume illness, confusion, or despair. Let him. Every guess would be a mirror showing him who he truly was. I had spent a lifetime building him into a man. Now it was time to let absence finish the lesson. That evening, as waves crashed outside my window, I made one final call to Mr. Hale. "It's done," I said. "Everything's in motion." He replied, "Good. Then it's time for them to learn the value of what they lost." I smiled softly. "No, Mr. Hale. It's time for me to learn the value of what I kept." I ended the call, opened the window, and let the ocean wind wash over me. Somewhere far behind, a son was realizing too late that sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the loudest power. And somewhere deep inside me, a woman who had been invisible for decades finally took a full breath and whispered into the night, "Now watch me vanish." The 3rd day after my disappearance began with an alert from Mr. Hale. He's filed a missing persons report. I sat at the edge of the motel bed, coffee in hand, watching seagulls fight over crumbs on the boardwalk. The world didn't care that my son had just realized he lost his mother, not to death, but to consequence. Somewhere in the city, Daniel must have been pacing police stations, showing my picture, pretending concern, spinning a narrative where he was the worried son and I the fragile, confused old woman. Let him play the role. Every story needs a hero, even if it's built on guilt. Within 24 hours, my phone, now locked in a motel drawer, filled with voicemails. The first was Brooke, her voice high and panicked, "Evelyn, please, this is crazy. Daniel's worried sick. Just call back." Then Lorraine, smooth as silk and twice as slippery, "Evelyn, dear, we're all praying for your safety. The police are doing everything they can." I laughed quietly. Praying? For my safety? They were praying for damage control. Missing mothers don't look good in social feeds filled with champagne and diamonds. They must have realized that the optics had shifted. The same crowd that clapped when the ring glittered would now whisper, "Where's his mother?" The internet always finds irony faster than truth. Later that day, Mrs. Alvarez texted through the number I had given her secretly. "They've been here twice. Police think you might have wandered off." I said, "You're fine." They looked confused. I smiled. The act was working perfectly. The slippers, the light left on, the unplugged phone, all of it painted a picture of quiet mystery. But I wasn't running. I was waiting. That evening, Mr. Hale executed the next phase. Statement A, the press release went live on the Carter Mothers Fund website, a message crafted in my voice, approved months ago. It read, "I am alive and safe. I have chosen to step away from contact to pursue private work. Please respect my decision and support the Carter Mothers Fund in helping women who gave everything to families that forgot their worth." Within hours, it spread. Local news outlets picked it up, then national ones. Hashtags bloomed. Hashtag the disappearing mother, hashtag Carter Fund, hashtag justice for moms. The narrative flipped overnight. Daniel's picture from that dinner, him smiling, Lorraine flaunting the ring, surfaced beside the statement. The contrast was brutal. The comments section overflowed with strangers defending me. She raised him, he replaced her. The real diamond was his mother. Good for her, vanish rich, not bitter. The court of public opinion had delivered its verdict. I didn't need to speak. Silence had gone viral. The next morning, Mr. Hale called. It's begun, he said simply. They've reached out to me for clarification. Should I tell them about Statement B? I sipped my coffee and replied, not yet. Let them sweat in the silence a bit longer. Guilt needs time to echo. Daniel tried calling again, this time from a blocked number. I didn't pick up, but I listened to the message later. Mom, please. I don't know what's happening. Reporters are calling. Brooks crying. Just come home. We'll fix this. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. I almost believed the fear. But then he said something that froze me, you've embarrassed us. Us. Not me. Not I'm sorry. Us. The word of shared ego, not shared remorse. I deleted the voicemail. By the end of the week, the first news segment aired. A polished anchor looked straight into the camera and said, in a world where family greed often hides behind smiles, one mother's quiet disappearance has become a national conversation about dignity. They played clips of the foundation's site, my quote highlighted in bold, love that demands gratitude isn't love, it's control. It trended for days. Donations flooded in. Women began sharing their own stories online, mothers abandoned, widows dismissed, grandmothers forgotten. What began as revenge was turning into something bigger. My absence had become a movement. That night, I walked along the shore, letting the cold waves lick at my ankles. Somewhere behind me, on screens I'd never see again, my face was being discussed by strangers who called me brave. But bravery wasn't what I felt. I felt tired. Not the tired that sleep cures, but the kind that comes from carrying invisible weight for too long. Yet, for the first time, the weight wasn't mine alone. I was finally giving it away, to those who needed it. The next morning brought a surprise. A delivery arrived at the motel desk, no name, just a courier slip. Inside the package was a box of my favorite tea and a note in Daniel's handwriting, if this is your way of teaching me something, I'm listening. Please come home. For a second, my throat tightened. Then I noticed the envelope tucked beneath it, Brooks' handwriting. Mom, this whole thing is spiraling. People online are calling us monsters. Please, stop this before it ruins Daniel's career. There it was again, career, reputation, not love. Not even remorse. I tore the note in half and threw it away. That evening, I called Mr. Hale. It's time, I said. Release Statement B, he hesitated. Are you sure? This one burns bridges. Then let it burn, I replied. 2 hours later, the website updated again. Statement B, those who betray gratitude lose inheritance, not out of spite but principle. My estate is sealed. My love remains, but it will no longer fund arrogance. The wording was poetic but precise. The trust documents, legally binding, confirmed it. Daniel was removed as beneficiary, permanently. The Carter Mothers Fund now owned every asset in my name. The internet exploded again. Headlines read, she left millions to strangers. Her family gets nothing. For the first time in his life, Daniel couldn't control the narrative. Reporters waited outside his apartment. Lorraine stopped attending galas. Brooke deleted her social media. The empire of image was crumbling. Meanwhile, the fund tripled in donations. Hale called again that night, his tone amused. You've started something unstoppable. No, I said quietly. I just stopped pretending. Days passed. I learned the rhythm of freedom, morning walks, quiet meals, anonymous smiles at strangers who didn't know my history. But part of me knew this wasn't over. Daniel wasn't the type to surrender easily. He would try to contact Hale, maybe even challenge the trust. That's why there was a third statement waiting, Statement C, my final contingency. On the 7th day, it arrived. Hale called again, his voice more serious now. He's threatening legal action. He claims you were coerced or mentally unstable when you signed the documents. I laughed softly. Good. That means the story's working. File the response. Hale exhaled. As you wish. Shall I release the addendum too? Yes, I said. Let them know the test has begun. The next morning, the Carter Mothers Fund homepage changed one last time. A short video appeared, my voice narrating over soft piano. Money doesn't corrupt people. It reveals them. For every dollar I gave in silence, I watched who thanked me and who felt entitled. The test is simple, humility redeems, greed condemns. This is not revenge. It's inheritance, earned by character. Beneath the video was a new section labeled The Test. It listed 3 conditions for any beneficiary of the Carter Trust. 1. Complete 200 volunteer hours at a local elder care center. 2. Publicly apologize to an elder previously disrespected. 3. Donate $5,000 to a single mother household without publicity. Proof required. Failure to comply voids all claims. The comments exploded with applause. Viewers called it poetic justice. Journalists called it revolutionary. But for Daniel, it was a public trial of conscience. I could almost hear his frustration echoing through every headline. He wanted to hate me, but every sentence made him look smaller, not me. The son who once bragged about charity events now had to earn forgiveness through actual charity. The following week, Mr. Hale updated me, they've accepted the conditions, at least on paper. But between us, it's performative. I've seen the receipts. Lorraine mocked the volunteer hours. Brooke rehearsed an apology video. Daniel's trying to cheat the system. I nodded slowly. Then Statement C is ready. Wait until they fail. That night, I sat by the window again, notebook open, pen hovering above the page. I wrote one line and underlined it twice. Love isn't proven by presents. It's proven by who stays when the money doesn't. Then I leaned back and smiled. Justice didn't always need judges. Sometimes it just needed time. And time, finally, was on my side. The weeks that followed were a slow unraveling of the image Daniel and his family had built. The tabloids had moved past the novelty of a missing mother with millions and turned it into a full-blown morality tale. Every day, new headlines appeared, the son who lost $28 million to pride. The mother who outsmarted her own blood. Carter Fund saves 300 single mothers in its first month. I watched it all from a small cafe by the ocean, sipping tea and reading the paper like a stranger studying her own myth. The Carter Mothers Fund had gone global. Donations poured in from women who saw themselves in me, forgotten caregivers, single mothers, grandmothers raising grandkids. News anchors debated whether I was a genius or a vindictive matriarch. Some called me selfish. Others called me saintly. But I didn't need their labels. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living for applause or approval. The noise of judgment faded the moment I stopped performing for it. Daniel, however, couldn't silence the noise. He tried to complete the conditions, publicly and perfectly. I knew him too well. He would never volunteer without cameras. He would never apologize without an audience. When Hale sent me the first progress report, it read like a script written for redemption rather than sincerity. Volunteer hours submitted, 215, verified, 0, apology video, edited, promotional. Donation receipt, issued to Brooke's cousin's business under childcare charity. My pen hovered over the report, then I drew a simple word at the bottom, fail. Hale called that evening. They didn't even try to hide it, Evelyn. The Elder Center called to confirm he showed up once, for 20 minutes, left after photos. The apology videos being ridiculed online. It's backfiring. I looked out the window at the waves crashing against the shore. Good. Exposure is better than punishment. Let people see the difference between repentance and performance. Hale chuckled quietly. You're colder than I remember. No, I said softly. I'm measured. Cold people act from spite. Measured people act from justice. The next day, Statement C went live. It wasn't a legal document or press release this time. It was a story, published as an anonymous op-ed in a major newspaper. But everyone knew who it was about. The title read, The Price of Respect. It began, there are two kinds of children, the ones who see what their mothers gave, and the ones who see what's left to take. The piece detailed the invisible sacrifices mothers make, the missed meals, the double shifts, the clothes washed by hand so their children could wear something clean to school. It never named Daniel or Brooke, but the details were unmistakable. A son who gifts diamonds to strangers while his mother mends her slippers has already sold his soul at a discount, I wrote. And when that mother disappears, it's not to hide, it's to heal. The article trended within hours. Talk shows dissected it. A podcast titled The Vanishing Mother devoted a series to my story, interviewing psychologists about generational gratitude. Every word I'd written became a mirror for families to see themselves. The story was no longer just mine, it was everyone's. For Daniel, it was humiliation. For me, it was freedom. 3 days later, a letter arrived at my motel. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately, his. Inside was a single page, I failed your test. Not because I didn't try, but because I didn't understand what you wanted. You've made me a villain to the world. I don't even know who I am anymore. Beneath it, another line, if the goal was to break me, congratulations. I stared at the letter for a long time, then folded it back neatly into the envelope. He still didn't understand. This wasn't about breaking him, it was about rebuilding him, if he chose to. But ego is a stubborn architect, it keeps rebuilding the same broken house, expecting a different view. A week passed. I kept to my rituals, coffee at dawn, letters at dusk, quiet walks through the market. People no longer recognized me. The makeup of anonymity suited me well. But one evening, as I walked back to my motel, I saw a familiar figure leaning against the railing near the boardwalk, a man in a gray suit, head bowed. My heart stumbled before my steps did. Daniel. He looked older, thinner. His hair was unkempt, his eyes tired. He turned slowly when he heard my footsteps. Mom, he said softly, voice breaking on the word. I froze. How did you find me? He smiled sadly. You still use the same brand of tea. You signed the delivery receipt in your handwriting. I just had to follow the trail. I wanted to be angry, but the exhaustion in his face stopped me. You shouldn't be here, I said. The press will devour you if they see us together. I don't care about the press anymore, he said, stepping closer. I came to say I'm sorry. I studied him carefully. Sorry for what? For losing the money? For losing control? He shook his head. For forgetting who I was before I started caring about what people thought. His voice trembled. I know I can't undo it. The things I said, the things I didn't say, but Mom, please. Just tell me what you want from me. I'll do it. I turned away, staring at the dark sea. I don't want anything. That's the part you never understood. Parents don't raise children expecting payment. We raise them hoping they'll learn to live with gratitude, not guilt. He took another step closer. Then let me prove it. You already had the chance, I said quietly. And you turned it into theater. I know, he whispered. But let me try again. No cameras, no statements, just me. I hesitated. There was something different in his voice this time. Less performance, more surrender. Why now? I asked. He looked down. Because the silence is too loud. Because for the first time, I can hear what it sounds like to miss you. Something inside me cracked, not forgiveness, but understanding. I sighed softly. Then start by helping someone who can't pay you back. Not for the cameras, not for me. Do it quietly, and don't tell me about it. Just let time show whether it's real. He nodded, eyes glassy. I will. We stood there in silence, the ocean wind wrapping around us like old fabric being mended one final time. Then he turned and left. No dramatic goodbye. No promises. Just a nod, a small bow of respect. It was enough. Weeks passed again. I heard nothing from him. I didn't check the news. I didn't ask Hale for updates. I wanted the quiet to work on him. But one morning, a newspaper headline found me anyway. Disgraced son turns volunteer. The photo showed Daniel in plain clothes at an elder care center, serving food to residents. No cameras, no speeches. Just him, working quietly. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or pity. I felt peace. That evening, I wrote him one final letter, "You found your own way back." That's all I ever wanted. I'm proud, not because you changed, but because you chose to. I sealed it and mailed it to his apartment without a return address. Months later, I returned to the city, not to reclaim anything, but to visit Hale. The office smelled the same, wood polish and paper. He smiled when he saw me. You've caused quite a legacy, Evelyn. The fund's now the largest of its kind in the region. Thousands of women helped. He paused. And Daniel? I asked. Hale handed me a folder. Inside were photos, Daniel speaking at community events, helping the elderly, launching a mentorship program for young men raised by single mothers. He's changed, Hale said softly. He credits an unnamed teacher. I closed the folder slowly. Then the test worked. Hale nodded. You know, you could go back. Let him know you're proud. I smiled faintly. He already knows. You don't need to say the words when your silence says everything. That night, I visited my old home for the first time in a year. The neighborhood looked smaller. The porch light was new, the walls freshly painted. Through the window, I saw Daniel sitting at the dining table, reading a letter. My letter. He looked older but lighter. On the wall behind him hung a framed photo, me, young and smiling, needle and thread in hand. I stood there a long time, unseen, and whispered into the night, "You finally see me." Then I turned and walked away. Back at the motel, I packed my suitcase again. Not to disappear this time, but to travel, to live. The world still had corners I hadn't seen, stories I hadn't sewn into memory. I booked a ticket under my real name for the first time in decades. When the clerk asked if I wanted insurance, I laughed softly. No, dear. I've already insured my soul. Before I left, I wrote one final note for Mr. Hale to publish after my passing. Money can be stolen, love can be faked, but gratitude, real gratitude, never dies. It only waits to be remembered. As the plane rose above the clouds, I looked down at the city shrinking beneath me. Somewhere in that maze of lights was my son, finally learning what wealth really meant. And somewhere deep inside me, the woman who once sowed dreams for others finally felt stitched together again. When people tell this story, they might call it revenge. But revenge ends with victory. What I found was peace, and peace, unlike money, cannot be spent. It can only be shared. And so, I disappeared again, not from guilt, not from pain, but from the version of myself who thought love had to be earned. I had learned the final truth: sometimes, disappearing is the loudest way to say I'm here. The last movement of my story did not arrive with trumpets. It arrived like breath on a window, soft, undeniable, leaving a trace only if you leaned close enough to see. A year had stretched and thinned since I walked away from the life where I was visible only as a utility. In its place stood a life where silence worked like sunlight through leaves, everything that needed to grow found a way, and what did not, withered without ceremony. By then the Carter Mothers Fund had become less rumor and more infrastructure. It lived in shelters that stopped smelling like waiting rooms and started feeling like bridges. It lived in daycare stipends that arrived before panic did. It lived in a teenager's acceptance letter to a nursing program taped with pride to a refrigerator bought with a grant labeled emergency high food, not flowers. People said I had given away a fortune. That wasn't true. I had returned it to the women who minted it in the first place, one double shift at a time. Mr. Hale called on the morning that begins this ending. 2 things, he said, voice like a metronome that had kept me steady through storms. First, the fund has crossed 100 million in external donations. It is actuarially self-sustaining even under conservative yield. Second, Daniel asked for a meeting. He wants no money. He wants nouns. Clarity. Closure. Closure is a word we use when we want pain to behave. Pain rarely does. Still, I agreed. 1 hour. At your office. No press. And, Hale, no safety net. If he wants truth, let it land without pillows. I arrived early, wearing the kind of gray that refuses biography. Daniel came late, wearing a suit that looked like he'd learned to hang it on humility rather than ego. There was space in his eyes where there hadn't been before. Space makes room for sight. "Hi, Mom," he said, and the word was smaller than I remembered, as if he had trimmed it down to what it should have weighed all along. "Sit," I said, and then we did the most radical thing 2 people can do after war, we allowed the quiet between sentences to do half the work. He spoke first. "I read your statements again. I hated you, then I envied you, then I believed you. I don't need your forgiveness the way I thought I did. I need to learn how to live without an audience." "You already began," I said. "Audiences are loud, service whispers. You can only hear one at a time." He told me about the Elder Center, the man who only ate the dessert first because war had taught him that sweetness is never guaranteed, the woman who asked for her hair braided every Wednesday because she had a church inside her that required ceremony even when pews were far away. He told me about learning how to say "I'm sorry" to people who did not owe him the job of absolving him. He told me about sweeping floors after the lights went out because he had learned that redemption is the work you do when the camera is dead. "Do you forgive me?" he asked at last. "I don't assign grades anymore," I said. "I watch attendance. Keep showing up. That's the only pass I recognize." He nodded, and for the first time in years, left a room without taking any of it with him. After he left, Hale poured tea. "You look lighter," he said. "I put down a future I kept trying to mother," I said. "Futures are not children. They don't belong to us just because we fed them." The days that followed were stitched with travel. I booked rooms with windows and avoided rooms with mirrors. The fund's emails came to a device whose do not disturb setting had become a theology. I answered what needed a heart, delegated what needed a calculator, and ignored what needed outrage. Outrage is a tax paid to someone else's empire. In a harbor town that still smelled of rope and tide, I found a library with a green-shaded lamp and a wooden chair that understood backs older than ambition. The librarian, silver hair, wrists full of bracelets that clinked like polite bells, recognized me without announcing it. "The quiet table near the ficus," she said, sliding me a card with an expiration date that outlived my plans. I wrote longhand again. A sentence became a small porch I could sit on. A paragraph became a street I could walk down without being followed. Letters began to arrive, some addressed to the fund, some addressed to the idea of me. I read a handful each week, as a doctor might check pulse. A woman wrote from a motel paid for by strangers after her landlord changed the locks and the reason. "Your grant said, first month, last month, and faith," she wrote. I had the first 2. "Thank you for loaning me the 3rd. Another letter contained a postcard drawn in crayon from a 7-year-old boy who wanted me to know that his mother does the brave face a lot less now. He drew me with a cape. I laughed aloud, then pressed the drawing flat under the green lamp as if it were a map that might guide someone else after me. The fund grew teeth and tenderness. Our small legal team helped women exit leases written to make poverty a permanent address. Our micro-scholarships came with childcare vouchers stapled to the acceptance letters. We refused to fund white balloons and GoFundMe funerals when what was needed was rent and insulin. We taught grant writers to remove the sentences where dignity was traded for sympathy. We taught donors to accept receipts instead of redemption arcs. Every month, Hale sent me a one-page dashboard that avoided the pornography of suffering and instead spoke in the grammar of outcomes: nights indoors, hours of daycare purchased, nursing certificates completed, restraining orders granted, stitches removed, stitches taught. Then came the first true test of our scaffolding, a rumor that we had denied a high-profile application from an influencer who filmed her tears with three-point lighting. She told her followers the fund had abandoned a sister. The storm gathered in the predictable shape. Hashtags do not require truth to trend. We did not clap back. We published our policy, scrubbed of identifying details, and a two-sentence explanation: we fund necessities that cancel panic. We do not fund optics that prolong it. Then we posted a week of anonymized micro-stories approved by the women themselves: groceries delivered at 10:47 p.m. during an ice storm, a locksmith arriving before a violent ex could, a daycare bill paid on a Thursday so a Friday shift could be worked without a toddler learning exhaustion as a first language. The storm spent itself the way weather does when it discovers the mountain it ran into was not performing either. The mountain, however, was not immune to time. It began to snow inside my joints in ways that required pauses instead of sprints. I told Hale I wanted a succession plan that didn't rely on saviors. I want a board that reads budgets like novels and novels like budgets, I said. I want a chair who has been poor in the dark, not poor for a TED Talk. We recruited carefully, sometimes saying no to the loudest yes. A nurse who knew the cost of gloves became our treasurer. A former cashier who ran numbers in her head faster than most MBAs became our audit chair. A social worker who had learned to file reports without losing her own face in them became our executive director. I stayed founder, a word that means both origin and person who still remembers how to open the heavy door. Daniel called every few months without asking for a calendar invite. Quick update, he'd say. Still showing up. Still learning to leave before applause. Once, he told me he'd started a Saturday mentorship hour for boys raised by single mothers. We call it Reps for Respect, he said, almost embarrassed. They carry groceries for elders. They don't get service hours. They get stories. I heard it in his voice, the sound of an empire exchanged for a neighborhood. He did not become a saint. Saints are an economy I cannot afford. He became a man who could notice. That is richer. A year and a season later, I returned to the city to attend our first Carter Fund convocation, a gathering of scholarship recipients who were graduating into jobs that required ID badges and paid lunch breaks. The auditorium was simple, the kind that costs more in care than in marble. On stage, a row of women sat with caps on hair that had learned to be both crown and shield. No spotlight found me. I had requested a seat in the back near the exit, a place for people who have spent too many years learning to leave when kindness became conditional. A young woman took the podium. She was taller than her fear and steadier than the paper shaking in her hands. When I applied, she said, I wrote that I wanted to become a nurse so I could be the person who doesn't look away when pain shows up. The fund didn't ask me for a sob story. They asked me for a schedule. Laughter first, then applause, the good kind, the kind that convinces a nervous heart it can remain. Later, in the lobby with the smell of sheet cake and church punch, people pressed my hand and called me by a name they had earned the right to use. I accepted the warmth and declined the myth. We did it, I corrected gently when someone said, you did this. Pronouns are policies. On the train back to the coast, the window gave me back a face I recognized, lined but not partitioned. I slept with my cheek against cool glass and woke to a text from Hale. You were seen leaving before the speeches. The photographer got your back. It's a perfect picture. I wrote back, my favorite angle. The crisis I did not plan for arrived quietly, the way ships fail, not by one wave but by water learning the seams. My cardiologist's office smelled like lemon wipes and statistical inevitabilities. Manageable, she said. Medications. Walk. Less salt. More mornings. I did as told, and when I forgot, my body remembered for me by borrowing breath without permission. I began writing at a smaller desk. I learned the physics of standing up slowly. I gave away more of my sweaters because warmth started to feel like a verb I could apply to other people. I also wrote my last letter. Hale joked that I had already written 10 last letters. This is the actual one, I said. The others were rehearsals. I kept it short on purpose. Poverty makes people read quickly, my letters should, too. To whoever keeps the light on after me, I did not outsmart greed. I merely refused to negotiate with it. Do not turn this fund into theater. Pay the bill. Call the locksmith. Watch the kid. Don't make a photo out of a receipt. If you must carve my name into something, carve it into policy. If you must pray for me, pray for the women who still need a Tuesday at 3 p.m. to go right. The winter I turned 73, Daniel asked for coffee. He didn't pick a place with reclaimed wood or filament bulbs that glow like curated sincerity. He picked a diner that had never learned what an aesthetic was. The waitress called us both honey and meant it. I brought something, he said, and slid a folder across for Micah. Inside were scrappy worksheets and tidy ledgers. We started a cooperative hauling company, small residential moves, elder cleanouts, thrift donations. We hired 4 men who needed first chances, not second. We pay living wages, buy used trucks, and guarantee the last box is carried with patience, not tips. I turned a page and found a photograph taped in the corner, a group of men in matching t-shirts loading a crib into a van while a young mother watched with a face that contained both exhaustion and new math. The t-shirts read, "Respect lifts." I looked up and saw the boy I had raised standing in the skin of the man he had chosen. "You don't need my approval," I said. "I know," he answered. "I wanted your company." We ate pie we did not need. When the bill came, I let him pay, not because of gender or ritual, but because it mattered to him to carry something with his own hands. Spring arrived the way forgiveness does, noticed only after the frost stops announcing itself. The fund launched a pilot called Day 6 that covered the odd costs capitalism forgets to categorize: a mother's bus pass to court, a new pair of black sneakers required by a restaurant uniform, sheet protectors for a nursing binder. We learned that small money on time outperforms large money late. It is cheaper to prevent a fall than to repair the ankle. Not everything worked. One partner organization turned out to be a brand with a mission statement instead of a mission. We ended that contract in a letter that contained neither insult nor explanation. The explanation was the ending itself. You cannot teach people to value boundaries if you're afraid to write your own. The last summer my body allowed me long walks. I rented a cottage with a porch that did not apologize for its splinters. I read novels shamelessly and cookbooks like fiction. On Tuesdays I baked 2 loaves of bread and walked one next door to a widow who taught me that grief is an animal best fed small, regular meals. On Thursdays I sat on the porch and repaired clothes for neighbors who repaid me in peaches, stories, and the currency of a wave from a car window. Sometimes, late afternoon, I would rest and let my mind wander through rooms I no longer lived in, the seamstress table where I learned the patience that would later look like strategy, the kitchen where I taught a boy to stir sauce clockwise because counterclockwise felt like arguing with the world, the courthouse steps where I almost turned around and didn't. In these visits, regret no longer insisted on a chair. It stood politely, listened, and left when told. The fund's convocation the following year was larger, louder, but not gaudy. The executive director, who refused microphones when a room didn't require them, asked if I'd like to say something. I shook my head. "I've already said it," I replied. "It's in the line items." She smiled, understanding that budgets can be elegies and victory songs at the same time. Daniel and I learned a rhythm. He did not call on holidays because he had learned that love not performed is often love most present. He called when he had questions about vendors, bylaws, or how to tell a volunteer their helpfulness had turned into control. I answered with versions of the same sentence, "Tell the truth sooner." When I fell ill for the last time, the nurse who adjusted my pillow had a tattoo on her wrist of a tiny threaded needle. "My mother calls it the Carter stitch," she said shyly when she noticed me noticing. "It means fix what you can reach, and leave what you can't to someone who can." We laughed, and I cried in a way that didn't require tissues, only gratitude. Hale visited with a folder he refused to call a folder. Legacy packet, he announced, as if renaming paperwork made it less mortal. Inside were the final board resolutions I had drafted, automatic triggers for emergency disbursements during heat waves and cold snaps, an outreach protocol to shelters that included a demand for feedback written by the women receiving aid, a salary floor that predicted inflation instead of reacting to it. "You've made kindness boring," he teased. "Good," I said. "Boring kindness outlives charismatic cruelty." I asked to see Daniel one more time, not because I needed goodbye, but because I wanted to hand him something that was not paper. He arrived in work pants and a shirt with salt rings that come only from sweat that paid for results. He held my hand while saying nothing performative with his face. "Take the singer," I said. "Not as an heirloom. As a tool. Keep it oiled. Fix what will still hold. Retire what won't." He nodded, then surprised me. "I brought you something." From his pocket he pulled a small, battered keychain, a silver letter D, the one he had given me years ago when he still measured love in trinkets. He had polished it until the past looked less like a bruise. "It should go with the machine," he said. "Every tool needs a tag." We traded objects the way divers trade air. The last night, I did not narrate. I let the room be a room. The window was cracked to let the honest air in. Voices rose and fell in the hallway like a tide, not interested in our particular shore. I slept as if closing a well-written book, no cliffhanger, just the knowledge that the story would keep doing its work even with the cover shut. Hale followed the instructions exactly. He did not put my face on a banner. He did not approve a mural. He published the letter that fit on a phone screen without scrolling. It said, "Pay the bill. Call the locksmith. Watch the child. Do it on Tuesday at 3 p.m., not Saturday at 8 when the lights are friendly. If you must name something after me, name it a policy change." People sent flowers anyway. The fund redirected every bouquet into grocery cards and bus passes. A florist complained on the radio that we had insulted beauty. A woman called in and said, "You can't insult beauty by giving it groceries." That clip made me laugh wherever I had gone. At the next convocation, they did not hold a moment of silence. They held a minute of phone calls. Each attendee texted or dialed someone they knew who needed something ordinary, a ride, a reminder, a referral, a reprieve. Phones lit up like votive candles. That minute did more for my soul than 10 statues could have, and it didn't cost anyone permission. Daniel kept showing up. He made mistakes and corrected them in the same week, not the next quarter. He learned that lifting boxes was less about biceps and more about not adding weight you didn't come to carry. He proposed a small addendum to the fund's bylaws that any board member must have stood in at least 2 lines in their life that felt like judgment, DMV, immigration, WIC, unemployment. The vote was unanimous. Experience is governance when humility counts it. As for the world, it did what it always does. It moved on without forgetting entirely. My name became less of a headline and more of a household verb in certain neighborhoods, just Carter it, women said to one another when a problem looked solvable if only someone would decide to do the boring, necessary thing. In those syllables, I lived longer than marble permits. And Daniel, my son who once thought diamonds proved love and learned instead that receipts do, kept a small wooden box on his dresser. Inside, the singer's bobbin, the silver D, a printed email that began approved, daycare stipend, and a grocery list written in my hand for a soup that tastes like being told you can rest now. On days when the work felt like mending the ocean with thread, he opened the box, touched each item, and returned to the truck. If there is a place where endings gather to compare notes, mine will arrive without drama and sit with the ones that knew the trick all along, that the loudest revenge is a quiet system that works. People will argue over whether what I did was vengeance or vision. They can. Arguments are also economies. The women catching buses at dawn to jobs that keep thermostats honest do not have time for definitions. They have a minute to sip coffee, kiss a forehead, lock a door, and know the fund will do what it always promised, turn Tuesday at 3 p.m. into a solved problem. This is the last stitch I can pull. The cloth holds. There will be frays. Good. A living fabric should fray. That is how you know it is being used by the people it was made for. If you need a benediction, take this and spend it without asking anyone's permission. They mistook my silence for weakness. I compounded it into policy. I vanished from their party and appeared where rent is due. When the light slants just right in late afternoon and the kettle sighs, tell whoever is near, we can just Carter it. Then, do. And if you ever feel as small as I once did behind a mountain of plates and a son's large future, listen for the sound in the next room. It might be a sewing machine, it might be a truck door, it might be a key turning in a new lock. All three are music. All three say the same thing the fund says, the same thing I finally said to myself the day I left with 28 million and a plan. You are allowed to choose the version of yourself who survives.